All right, so we've been practicing math. We've been going to Khan University. We've gone through some concepts that we're trying to remember. We've got multiplication tables that we need to memorize. We've got division processes. We've got some algebra stuff that we're trying to learn and get used to. And the question really becomes, well, how do we practice this stuff on a daily basis for at least 30 minutes to 45 minutes every day, just like we're doing our typing right now? How are we going to practice this stuff and have a nice, easy way to do it? Now, eventually, we may add some stuff to educate.us to go in and let you practice some of this stuff. But instead, what I thought would be a nice exercise is to actually write your own program in Python that allows you to go in and test yourself on some of these concepts so that you can remember them and get really good at doing them. And so instead of just giving you the solutions, what we're going to do is we're going to walk through exactly how do we write an application that's going to let us practice what we got to practice and use Python to do it. So let's take a look at what this would look like. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up Visual Studio Code. And if you don't have it installed, you can just Google it. But you're going to open up Visual Studio Code, and then we're going to come in here and tell it to open a folder. Now, when we open a folder, it's going to ask us what we want to open, and we're going to start off in our source folder. If you don't have a source folder in your home folder, then go ahead and create one, and you do that with the little icon up here. Now, I'm in a Mac computer. If you're on the Raspberry Pi, this is going to look a little bit different, but it's the same process. You're going to create a folder called source, then we're going to create a folder called Python, and then we're going to create another folder called daily, and that's going to be the folder that we actually open up to work with. Now, once we get that folder open, the next thing we need to do is we need to create a new file. Right now, I have a file in here called daily.py, but we're going to create a new file we're just going to call it daily test.py. So right here is a little icon. We're going to click it, and we're going to type in daily test.py. The py on the end lets the system know that's a Python file, and it lets us know it's a Python file. And so now let's talk a little bit about what we want to do. Well, there's going to be a few different things that we're going to try to accomplish in this, but the first thing that we know that we need is we're going to practice addition and subtraction. Well, in order to practice addition and subtraction, we don't want to sit here and say what is 1 plus 2, or 1 plus 3, and then have another one, what is 17 plus 23. What we would rather do is to have the computer go get a random number on its own and use that as the question. So that so every day we come in and run our application, we're getting completely different questions. We don't want to have to go in here and hard code questions, because then you're just going to get used to answering the same question and there won't be much point in practicing it. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to need to figure out in Python, how do we do a random number generator? And so what we're going to do is we're going to jump over here to Firefox, and we're going to go to DuckDuckGo, and we're going to type in Python random number. And then we'll just find a link here, and sometimes you have to click on different links to get one that you actually understand. We'll look at this one. It says Python tutorial. And so one of the things that we notice here is that the first thing that we're going to need to do is import this random library. So remember, a library is a bunch of code that someone else, and probably multiple people, have gone in and written to do a bunch of random things. So in this case, it all deals with random numbers. You may have another library for printing, another library for opening a control. So there's libraries for all kinds of different things. And it's one of the things that makes Python so powerful, is that there's practically a library for almost everything that you want to do. Now, as we've talked about in other videos, Python is not the fastest programming language in the world. In fact, it's far from the fastest programming language, but it happens to be a really good prototyping language for you to go in and actually set up a test program to test out your concepts. And in some cases, it ends up being fast enough to just let that be your final product. But if you're pushing your product out to a bunch of different people, or say like Tesla and their auto driving cars, they need that engine to be really responsive and be able to figure out that that's a deer and that's a baby in a baby carriage. It needs to figure that out really, really quickly. So Python, while is good for a start, it gets you there and gets you to be able to start testing things. It's really probably not going to be your final solution. So we're not going to pretend that Python's going to be the only language that you learn the rest of your life and it does everything, because it doesn't. But in this case, it's perfect for what we're trying to do, because how fast it gives me a new math problem isn't really important. So this tells us that we need this library. So we're going to copy this code right here, and we're going to jump over here to our editor, and we're just going to paste that into that line. So what it's doing is it's telling us from the random library, import everything. So this asterisk tells it that this is a wild card. It means everything in that library we want to import. Now, typically you don't need to do that. You can drill in and get more specific. And the reason for not importing everything most of the time is that if you don't need the whole library and you bring in a smaller piece of that library, it actually causes your code to run faster, because it's not having to bring so much in to be able to execute the application. So that's just something to think about. But in this case, that's what we have on our search. So we're going to do that. And then the next thing that we have here is random. And so we're just going to come right here at the end of this, and we're going to tell it to print a random number. Now at this point, I want to execute this and see if this works, because we want to try to, run our code as often as possible so that if we have a problem, we can fix it and not have to go into a whole bunch of other stuff. So we're just going to come up here to the run menu and tell it to run without debugging. Right now, we don't really need a debugger. And then down here at the bottom, it tells us what it did. And so let's see. So it generated a number here, but it happens to be a decimal number, and I can't point to it because it keeps bringing up a highlight, but you see the 0.521 that's sitting there. That number is a decimal. And if we jump back over here to our code, you'll notice this says random number between 0 and 1. And so this is a floating point number. Now, what is a floating point number? It's a number that has a decimal place in it, and that decimal place may float back and forth. It could be, 0.12, it could be 1.34, it could be anything. Now, in this case, we're generating that floating point number between 0 and 1, but it all means that there's a decimal place in there, and it's floating around where the decimal place actually ends up. So that's not really what we want for our math problems for basic addition and subtraction. So let's move down and take a look at the next one. So this one says to generate a random number between 1 and 100. Well, you'll notice that we still have from random import everything, but instead of calling random like we did up here, this says to call rand int, and to pass it 2 parameters. So the first parameter is our starting number. The second parameter is our ending number. So it's going to pick a number between 1 and 100. So let's try this. So we're just going to grab this particular part of the code, and we're going to go back over here, and we're going to replace random with rand int. And then now, I did not, when I highlighted that, I didn't get rid of the open and closing parentheses for the earlier function call, so we need to remove that. Now, you also notice that print, so right now, if we were to try to run this, so if we told it to run without a debugger, get back over here. So if we told it to run without debugger, you'll notice down here that it says that you have a syntax error, unexpected end of file while trying to parse the file. Well, the reason is because right now you have to be careful that you get your parentheses lined up correctly. So right now you'll notice print, and I have an open parenthesis. Then we do rand int, and we have another open parenthesis. We pass in our two parameters, which are start and end or numbers, and then we close a parenthesis, but we only closed once. So we opened twice, but we only closed once. So we need to go over here on the end of this line and add another closed parenthesis. So then we're going to come back up here, tell it to run. Now you'll also notice this says that if I press Control F5, it'll do this as well, but we're just going to go ahead and click the menu. And then down here at the bottom, you can see that it actually generated a random number of 90. Well, let's go run this again. This time it generated 54. So that seems to be doing what we want. However, we don't really want to print the number. We want to hold the number, and we also want to hold that number for a couple different variables. And so a variable is nothing more than a way to hold on to some value. And so what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of the ending parenthesis. We're going to come back over here and get rid of the print. So we have randint 100. Well, what I want to do is I'm going to set a variable. And so in Python, all we're going to do is we'll say first, whatever you want to name this, it doesn't matter. So first num equals this, but in order to do addition and subtraction, we need two numbers. So we're going to come in here and we're going to say second num equals, now we'll just say equals randint, and again, we want something between 1 and 100. Okay, so that gives us two numbers. So let's see how that works out. So the next thing that we need to be able to do, so we've set some variables, we've called our random int function, and we have two random numbers. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to ask the user a question. We want to ask them to add or subtract or whatever it happens to be, whatever we want to do for this particular operation. We want to be able to go in and get them to ask a question. But the thing is just like we have two random numbers, we also would like to have a random question. In other words, I don't want to always add. I would like to add and subtract. And so what we would like to do is to be able to choose between addition and subtraction. So one of the things that I would like to do is I would like to come up here and we're going to say operator. So we're going to set another variable and we're going to tell it to do another randint between 0 and 1. So what we want here is we want the system to generate us some random number between 0 and 1, and we're just going to say that 0 represents our addition and 1 represents our subtraction. So depending on which one of those we have, that's how we're going to determine whether we're going to actually tell you to add these two numbers or to subtract the two numbers. Now, the next problem we have is we need to tell it the operator. We need to look at the operator and see what exactly we're supposed to do. Now, how do you ask a question about an operator? How are we going to actually go in and do that? So the next problem that we have here is we need to back up because we've got our random stuff figured out. So let's back up now and let's search for Python if statement. In fact, we'll do an if else because we're going to need to do that. So Python if else. So what exactly is an if condition? Well, you do it every day when you're walking through life. You are presented with all kinds of different things that happen to you. And so you say, if my mom calls me to come eat, it's okay to continue playing video games. If my mom calls me twice to eat, maybe it's okay to play my video game. If my mom calls me to eat and she threatens to take my video game away, I need to go eat. So you've got these types of processes that are going on in your head all day long and you just don't think about it. So programming really isn't a new concept. These things that we're doing are very logical and very much common sense. They're not magic that somebody came up with that really you can't relate to anything. So in Python, we need to have an if condition that's going to determine what it is we're going to do. Now, I've searched for it, and we've just picked the first Google search that came up here. And so we can read through here. If we get down here to the example code, we can see here that we have a variable that they have created called var1. And then they have an if condition that says if var1, and they have a colon on the end of it. And then everything that's inside of here that's tabbed over 1 represents what's part of that if var1. And then when they get to the else condition, they just put the word else with a colon on the end. So it looks like we need to have a colon on the end of our if statement and on the end of our else statement. And then everything tabbed over underneath it is going to be part of that block, or that block of code. So let's try that out. So we're going to go back over here. And so we're going to say if, and we'll say if operator. And one thing we need to make sure of is they don't have parentheses on it. So it looks like it can just say if operator. All right. And I'm going to explain this in 1 second. So if operator equals 0, and then we're going to put a colon. Now, there's a couple things we're going to do here. First off, we're going to add a comment, and you add a comment so that you can remember what it is that we're doing. So we're going to put 2 slashes. So those are forward slashes, and that lets us put a comment in Python. So we're going to say, this is dealing with addition. Okay, this doesn't look right. You can see the text is white and blue and purple, like it doesn't recognize this double slash. So let's do another quick comment. We've got our if statement figured out. So let's jump back over here and do Python comments. So we'll just pick one of these guys and see what a Python comment looks like. So that looks like you can put 3 quotes to do a whole block of comments, but we don't really want to do that. This is not a very good website. Let's jump out and see what else we can find. Comments, boy. All right. So this looks like we need to put a pound sign in front, not 2 slashes. So it doesn't recognize 2 slashes. This gives you some comments in Java, but it looks like a pound sign is what we need to use. So let's jump back over here. And the one thing that I'm trying to point out here is that what I'm doing right now is the way that you learn a new language. Eventually, you're going to know that a pound sign is a comment line, and you're not going to have to look it up again. So the more you practice this, the more you get to where you don't have to keep doing these searches. But it's perfectly okay to continue to do searches until you get the language in your head and know exactly how all this stuff works. So what we're going to do here is we are going to come in here and tell it that if the operator is a 0, this is going to tell us that we're dealing with addition. And so what we want to do is we're going to tab over, because Python doesn't have braces, and it's probably the one thing about Python that I absolutely and utterly despise. However, it's part of the language, and it's just something that you have to learn and get used to. And you'll see that Visual Studio helps us out with this a little bit, so it makes it not quite so bad. So what we're going to do is we're going to now set another variable, and we're going to call it question, because we want to ask a question. And so we're going to set that equal. Now, we have a number, a variable called first num, but the problem is that that number is actually a number. And in Python, you can't mix numbers and text or strings together. You have to actually convert that number into a text value or a string value to be able to have it print. Now, if I were to try to print this in a minute, you're going to see that we'll actually get a problem. In fact, we'll go ahead and build this, and then we'll come back and do what we need to do. So we're going to tell it that we want to take first num, and we're going to add to that, and we're going to tell it that we want to add because, again, our operator is 0, which is we're using for addition. So we're going to say that number plus, and then we're going to add to that, we're going to add second num. So we're telling the system, and then we're going to add to that, we're going to put a colon and a space after it so that you know what you're looking at. So it's going to ask a question of first number plus the second number, and then a colon, and then it's going to wait for you to answer the question. However, if it's not a 0, that means that it is going to be a 1 because our number generator was from 0 to 1. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have an else condition. We already learned that you have to put a colon on the end of these. And so we only have one of two choices. So we really don't need to ask another if question because it's either a 0 or 1. We already handled the 0 condition. So now let's set this one up. So again, we're going to take the first num plus, and then we're going to do a minus this time. And then we're going to tell it to add to that the second num. And then we're going to add to that a colon and two spaces. So this is going to be our question. So let's print our question. So we know that to print in Python, we're going to type print, and then we're going to tell it to print the question. All right. So let's try to run this and see what happens. So we're going to tell it to run without debugger. And so we can see down here at the bottom that it's telling us we have a problem because it says question first num plus second number, and it says unsupported operand type for plus and int and string. So you can't add ints and strings together. So we need to go do us another search. So let's jump back over here to Google, or to, in our case, DuckDuckGo. And we're going to change this to Python, and we're going to say int to string. We want to know how to convert an integer, which is a number, into a string type, which is a character string, like a sentence. So how to convert int to string. So let's see if this helps us out here. So scroll down here. Dun, dun. Int. So this is, we're going to have to read in here. So that's Unicode, format string. This is not a very good website. So let's jump out of here. Converting integer to string. Here we go. So right here, it tells you that you send your number into another function called string, str. So the function call that we're going to call is called str, and we're going to pass a number into that string. So let's go do that. So we're going to come over here, and we're going to come back up here, and we're going to pass first num, which is an integer, and we're going to pass it into a function called string. And then we're also going to have to do the second number because it's an integer and we want to turn it into a string. All right. And then we got to do the same thing here because we have our addition and subtraction right now in two different lines. All right. And so now let's try to run this again. Run and run without debugger. All right, so now it's telling us, what is it telling us? Sock connection, host, and port. I don't even know what that is telling us. Second num. Problems. Output debug. Terminal. So what is this telling us now? Question, first num. It's almost like it didn't save it. Let's go to file, save. Whoop, I don't want to do a save as, I want to do a file save. Let's try this again. Scroll down here at the bottom, and it's giving me a connection refused again. And this is what you would get is if you were trying to do a network program. So I'm not sure what it's trying to connect to. Let's see. Okay, right here it says question equals first num plus this second num, but this is not our, this is the first time we ran this. I wonder if we can, let's see if we can delete the terminal and then run this thing again so that we've got a clean run debugging. Okay, so this actually worked. So it looks like you have to delete that debugging information because it gets a little messed up, and then run your program again. So you can see here that it's asking 22 minus 92. Well, let's run it again. Run without debugging. This time it was 87 plus 21. So we'll try one more. And this time it's 74 plus 8. So there's one more thing that we need to be able to do here. We need to ask the question, and then we need to actually get some input. We need to let the user answer that question. So let's do another DuckDuckGo search, and we're going to change it to Python. And so what are we trying to do? We're trying to get input from user. So let's just try that. Get input from terminal. That'll work. How to prompt for user input. So let's see what this does. So this is actually someone asking a question, which is exactly what we want to know. And so it looks like right here we set the text, which is going to be their answer, equal to the input of the prompt. And our prompt is what we have set up as our question. So we're going to try this. So let's go back over here and let's come to the bottom of just before our print, and we're going to say answer equals input question, and then we're going to tell it to print the answer. So let's go back up here. Let's delete our terminal here, come back up here to run without debugging. And so now notice that it's waiting for me to put something in here. So 50 minus 77. So I'm just going to put a number in, and then we're going to hit the enter key. And you'll notice that it's printing what my answer is. Well, let's make sure. Let's do it one more time. So now it's 24 minus 82 or minus 80. So let's put 45, and we get 45 back. So the last thing we're going to do in this part of this Python program is we need to decide what the actual answer is supposed to be. So let's think about, we've got the question, we've got the answer, but now we need to see if the answer was correct or not. And so let's get rid of our print statement, and we've got to do another if statement. Well, let's try this. Let's say if, and we already know that we have an answer and we have a question and we have two numbers. Well, the answer is what we're looking for. So let's say if the answer, oh, I forgot to explain something. Notice this has two equal signs up here. Two equal signs are a comparing operation. In other words, I'm comparing is operator equal to 0. If I were to only put one equal sign here, then I am assigning 0 to operator. I'm actually saying I want operator to hold 0. So when you're doing if statements and comparing things, you want to make sure that you get two equal signs up here. Otherwise, you're not going to get what you think you're going to get. And if you end up not getting what you think you need to get, you need to go back and look at it and make sure you have two of them. So we want to say if answer equals, and now what is the answer? Well, our answer is going to be, we're going to put this in parentheses just to make sure that everything adds up or subtracts the way we want it to. So we're going to say if the answer equals our first num minus, or I'm sorry, our first num, and then we've got to do an operator. So we've got to remember, we don't really know whether or not they did an addition or a subtraction. So before we can actually do this, what we need to do is we need to say if the operator is equal to 0. So this is the condition where we know that the we're doing addition. So we're going to tell it if the operator is 0. So here we're doing addition. We learned already that this is a pound sign. Doing addition. So we know that we need to have first num plus second num. So if the first num is equal, the first num plus the second number is equal to the answer that they gave us, and then remember we got to put a colon out here on the end, then we're going to print good job. Okay? So if the answer equals the answer that we're looking for, then we're going to tell it good job. Else, we're going to print wrong answer. Okay? So we're basically telling it that if we get an addition problem, then we want to compare whether or not we got the right things over here. And you'll notice that Visual Studio is putting some lines underneath our if condition so we can see where our blocks are lining up. All right, so let's run this and see what happens. So we're going to go run without debugging. And look, we have a question of 55 plus 35. Let's put the wrong answer in. We're going to hit enter. And it says wrong answer. So let's try that again. So we're going to go back up here and we're going to say run without debugging. This time we got 66 minus 2. And so we're going to put in 64. And it crashed. It didn't tell us right answer. So what is happening there? So right now the operator, oh, I'm sorry, it didn't crash. We don't have a condition here for minus. So this is a problem. Right now we're only dealing with the addition. So how are we going to deal with the subtraction? Well, we're going to deal with it exactly like we did up here. Up here we had a block that said if it's 0, do this, else we did this. So let's go in here, back all the way back up, because we want this else condition to be part of this command here, not this if. So this is a separate else from what we had a minute ago. So we're going to say else. And now we want to do the same thing that we did right here. So what we can do to speed this up is we can just copy this. And then we'll come right here and we'll paste it into here. And then we need to change this to a minus. So now we have if the answer of first num minus second number, then we print good job. Otherwise, wrong answer again. So now let's try to run this again. So we're going to say run without debugging. It says we have a problem. So let's delete this and run it again. So we got a clean debug window down there. So this is telling us that we have a problem with this else. So what is the problem? So we have if operator else, and I'm wondering if you have to do something special since we have an if else inside of this if else. It looks like, let's see, that, print this, else, print that. It's got a little squiggly underneath that colon right there for this else condition, but I'm not sure why. And it says unindent does not match any other indentation level. Okay, so let's make sure. Oh, so when I pasted that code in, and see, this is a perfect example of why I hate Python. So you notice when I pasted that code in, it's the I is not lined up with the lines above it or below it. It's actually one tab off. So what we got to do is tab that over so that it lines up with the other conditions here. So it's kind of goofy the way that works, but it's good that it showed up now so you can kind of see what happens. So the compiler, if you read down here, it gives you pretty good information as to what your problem is, but that's what happened there. So let's delete this again and start over, and we're going to come back up here and tell it to run with debug. So now we want 80 plus 61. We're going to put in the wrong answer. Wrong answer. So let's go back up here and run it again. So this is a subtraction problem. So let's do a wrong answer on the subtraction to make sure that it's also working correctly. Again, wrong answer. So let's go up here. So both those worked good. So now we've got another subtraction problem. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do 94 minus 39. And so that answer is 55. So that tells us that we got a wrong answer. So the problem there, no, what did I put in there? Yeah, that's right, 80. Let me do it on my phone here. 94 minus 39 is 55. So this is a subtraction problem, and it did not find the correct answer. It thinks that the answer that we put in was incorrect. So looking at our code up here, we were in the subtraction section. So we're going to put a pound sign right here because you can put comments on the ends of these lines too. So dealing with subtraction in this section. Okay. So we had a correct answer, but it thinks that we did not. So the question was 94 minus 39, which should have been 55, and that's what I put in for the answer. And it says that we got a wrong answer. So looking up here, it says if answer equals first num minus second num, then we should have printed good job. And I really have no indication as to why that came up with the wrong answer. Let's try another one and see what's going on here. So this is 54 minus 90. So 54 minus 90 is negative 36. And it still gave me a wrong answer. So we're going to have to do a little bit of research here and figure out why this thing is thinking that these two numbers are not the same thing. So one of the things that we could do is we could come down here and we could print. Let's print out answer. So that's going to give us the answer to the problem. And then let's print, and we're going to print out, that thing popping up there is a little annoying. We're going to print out, get this print C up there. We're going to print out, we'll just do first num minus second num. And then we'll print out first num plus second num. So we'll have the answer to those three problems. And I'm not sure if this is even going to work because I don't know it, because print is printing a string and these are all numbers. So I don't know if this is actually going to work. If not, we'll go back and do another search. All right, so I'm just going to put in a wrong answer. Okay, so this gives me the answer of, it gave me 33, which is what we put in there. It gives an answer of if we were to subtract them, and then an answer if we were to add them. So it should have put in 175. So now let's run this so we know that code is actually working. So now let's actually do another question. So now we have 70 plus 27. So we know that that is a 97. So we're going to hit enter. And so this is what we put in. This is what we compared, but it told us that the answer was wrong. Okay, so what I suspect is happening, and I'm kind of surprised that it didn't tell us what the problem was, because and I want to be clear, these are the types of problems that you can run into in an interpreted language where types and things are not really all that important. It kind of treats everything the way it wants to, and sometimes you can find things, sometimes you can't. But this is a good example of, I think, a possible problem. And the problem is that over here, this is going to come back with a number. So this is a number, but this input is actually returning a string. Even though we typed in a number, so we put in 44 or whatever we put in, answer actually becomes the type of a string because it came from the keyboard, and I could have put in hello instead of a number. So I need to, when we type, this is called typecasting. We casted this number as a string, and I bet there is a way to do the opposite. So let's jump back over to DuckDuckGo and let's change our search again. And this time let's put in integer to string. And I bet you just put int around the thing, but let's see. I think this is that same goofy website that didn't have any answers on it. So let's go over here. So this is a number, string week. Those are all giving us the string side of things. So that is not helping us to go from an int to a string. Here, let's see what this is. Here we go. So int is right here is our function to go the other way. So now let's jump back over here. And so what we want to do is we want to convert answer from a string into an integer so that we can actually compare the numbers the way that we actually want to compare them. So now we're dealing with two numbers instead of a string and a number, because a string and a number will never compare to being the same thing. So let's clean out our debug thing and let's run this without debug again. So now it wants to know what 89 minus 100 is. So we're going to go in here and say 89 minus 100. And so that is going to give us a negative 11. And now you see it says good job. So the problem that we just ran into, and it's something that you have to be aware of. We've had a couple things that you got to kind of pay attention to. The first is your spacing, your tabs that you're coming across the page with. They have to line up. If they don't line up, they're totally screwed up in Python. There is no other way to make a block work other than making sure all your tabs are in the right spot. So you'll have to deal with that while we're doing this. Eventually we'll start learning some Rust programming and other things that are actually typed languages, and you'll see the difference. It's a massive, Python is a lot faster to go in and write programs for. The real downside to me is the lack of braces. I will never understand why they thought that was a good idea. But in any case, you're going to be able to write programs faster in Python because of all the libraries and all the other things that you get with it than you are a strongly typed language like C++ or C or Rust or anything like that. But you do have to deal with some of this other kind of stuff. And as an example, if you were to do this problem in Rust or C++ or C, you would have gotten an error before you ever got to debug the program, because the compiler would have looked and said, hey, wait, you've got a string here and you're trying to compare it to a number. That's not a valid operation. You need to go fix that. Where an interpreted language just says, okay, fine, I'll compare a string to a number. They're not ever going to match, but I'll compare them. And then it's up to you to come in here and actually find what it is that you're looking for and why it's not coming out right. So the point here that we're going to take away from this is you can add some print messages in here to help debug the process. And then you test things in small units so that you can work out any problems you're having before you get into the bigger code. Because as you see, as we go through this code's going to get longer and longer, and we've only done addition and subtraction. We still need to do multiplication. We need to do our multiplication tables, which is what we'll do in the next video. And then we need to do regular multiplication, division, and then we're going to throw in some algebra, because that's something else that we've learned that we want to make sure that we keep practicing. So we're going to keep adding to this program until we have a good practice program that we can use every day. But right now, you can run it over and over and get it to ask a question. So the next thing we're going to do is actually fix this where we can do a loop and tell it to just keep asking us questions for 15 questions at a time, or whatever it is that we want to practice. So that's going to be the next video. Then we're going to go into the multiplication tables to practice them.